Hi guys, it's Chris speaking. Welcome back. I'm going to be talking about dysphoria today. So there's a fair bit of content online about the definition of dysphoria and a lot of explaining why it's necessary in terms of a transgender diagnosis. And I think for a lot of people it is. It's what pushes us to seek help or start questioning, going to counselling and whatnot. But it's not always the case. Simply put, dysphoria is basically distress that a person feels due to a mismatch between their gender identity and what they were assigned at birth, which is why it's important for that diagnosis. For me personally, I didn't know of the word. I only sort of came across it once I started researching in terms of sort of questioning my gender. I didn't know that I had it, and then it became the most important word in my vocabulary for a number of reasons. Like I said, there's a lot of content. There's a lot of content by the main trans YouTubers out there surrounding this word, and they're all sort of saying that you have to have it to be trans, and because of that, I started worrying that I wasn't, and that I was making it up, and that I was a trender. At the age of 28, I thought that I was a trender, and that if I had to have dysphoria to be trans, and because I didn't know what the word meant, I therefore didn't have it, and I was invalid. And I think that can be quite dangerous, especially for older people who are sort of starting to question their identity. It's not something that we're going to be, or not something that I was super familiar with. Because of all of that, and I think this part is rather important, I had to hear the words from a medical professional. I had to have a report in my hands physically with the words gender dysphoria on there, and that I was suffering it, before I could go further in my brain through to the HRT process. I think it is important to go through those hoops regardless of what age you are, in terms of getting a diagnosis or getting it recognised that you do have something which is pushing you to be transgender. I also think that euphoria can be just as important as dysphoria in realising that you are trans. I think, it's definitely worth, and I would always suggest that your first port of call is to seek out a gender therapist or a counsellor, and talk about what you're feeling. Even though I was already seeing a gender counsellor, because I was watching all of this content, I was worried that I was making it up. I was worried that I was just parroting what other people were saying, so I could get a HRT diagnosis, and then I was worried that what if I did get that diagnosis, and what if I did get on hormones? What then? What happens if I was making it up? And then, which is why it's important to sort of start that process and start talking about it, so that your professionals can help you go through those mental stages, because I think it does happen to a lot of us. For me, I took a hiatus from places like YouTube and Reddit. I had to retreat into my own sort of headspace to figure out whether I was suffering it or not, and just to get some sort of, personal answers. It got more confusing, so even though it was confusing hearing all of this information, without it, I was more confused, because at least these people were going through something similar to what I had gone through. Really? Sorry, it's raining, so you might have to deal with that. So even though these kids, they're young and opinionated, at least I knew that they were going through something like it. And it did push me to reach out to people in my own life, so real people in my real world who had transitioned, to talk about some of this stuff too. And a lot of what was spoken about all came back to dysphoria and the stigma surrounding that word. I think for people online, it is all well and good to provide an explanation and your opinions on the matter. I think there is a lot about dysphoria that we miss. For me, I didn't know what it was. I hadn't thought that I had experienced it up until that definition was in front of me. And then I thought I wasn't experiencing it enough. So I wasn't dysphoric enough to be trans, even because I was feeling it a different way than young trans kids who are quite well known for their content, who discovered that they were trans when they were younger, or they always knew when they were younger, and are putting their opinions out there into the world. So I then got into my head that I was confusing dysmorphia or body dysmorphia with gender dysphoria, and I was just uncomfortable with my body because it was flawed, not because I was wrong. I asked a psychologist when I was going through the gender clinic at the local hospital here, I said, where does that line get drawn between dysmorphia and dysphoria? They seem to merge into one at some parts until gender becomes part of that discomfort. So, for example, I'm feeling particularly shitty in my body because I'm in the wrong body, dysphoria, or I feel shitty about this part of my body, just in general, dysmorphia. But it isn't that simple. There's a lot of other factors that come into play. I think there are 100, potentially 1,000 ways that dysmorphia can manifest in someone's brain. It doesn't always have to be physical. It can be split basically into two groups, being social dysphoria and physical dysphoria. And I think in Queensland at least, you need to be suffering at least one of those to be signed off on HRT over the counter. So I needed to get signed off by 2 doctors in my own process to start hormones. If you do want to know about that process, or that medical process, and going from your GP to gender clinics to whatnot, let me know in the comments below, and I'm happy to sort of go through that whole process. It is quite long. I think I overcomplicated it for myself, but it was important for me to do it that way for my own journey. Anyway, I digress. So social dysphoria is more the discomfort about how people perceive you, I guess, and your own discomfort within social interactions. Things like using the bathroom. So I know that I still have trouble using a male restroom because I don't feel safe going in there. I don't use the female bathroom because I'm not a girl and I don't want to be in a woman's space when I don't identify that way. So that can cause quite the brain aneurysm when I need to go to the bathroom in public if a unisex isn't available. I've held it to the point where I'm in pain. I have gone out of my way to somewhere that I know that there is a unisex bathroom, just things like that. It's still not super comfortable, but I can use a male bathroom in public now. I'm still working on it at work. It's not the most comfortable because these are people that have known me pre, and yeah. It can also, be things like speaking in public. If your voice hasn't dropped and you're a female to male identifying human and you speak and your voice sort of gives you away, then that's a big one that gets sort of a lot of people in this situation. Physical dysphoria, I think, is sort of easier to explain. For a lot of trans folk, it's just about how our bodies look in comparison to how we think they should look. So for a male to female, having any sort of facial hair can be quite distressing, and then for a female to male not having any facial hair can be rather distressing. And for anyone who identifies as non-binary, or that example could go either way. Some patterns of dysphoria are fairly easy to detect in transition, but it's not fair to assume that all trans folk are going to be the same. No one is going to have the same journey as someone else. For example, I don't feel particularly uncomfortable about my chest because I'm practically flat-chested. My dysphoria around that part of my body is social rather than physical, or I would say it's more social. It's how I'm perceived by others. I won't leave my house without a binder or taping because I don't want others to see me as female at all, and having a flat chest sort of helps my brain cope with the fact that I'm outside. If someone looks at my chest, they're not going to see that I have any sort of tissue there. But if I'm at home, I'm pretty happy to be shirtless because I'm in my safe space and I've got a flat chest. For some people, their chests are unbearable and they can't do anything without a binder in their waking hours. Some people sleep with it on. It's not recommended. There are, people out there who have actually hurt their spines, and the way that their spines align gets shifted because they are binding for so long. But that's not something that is part of my experience. Don't get me wrong, there are some days that I won't take the binder off when I get home just because I'm not quite ready to admit that it's not completely flat yet. So I guess that, small part of physical dysphoria is there, but for mainly it's social for me. I think in the trans community there is so much judgment, about someone doing things differently to someone else. And as a community, we should just let people experience what they're feeling. Even though we all do it differently, we do it together. And I think that's really important to come back to and remember sometimes. The reason why I'm making this series is I don't think there is enough about dysphoria outside of a definition in the world. So over the next few weeks, I am aiming to go through stuff like Dormant Dysphoria. Personally, I didn't know I had it. Once I realised what the word was, I realised that I had experienced dysphoria before, but then having to sift through my past and find things that made sense to me now. I want to talk about developing dysphoria. Again, once I knew what that word was, it changed my world, and starting to put the pieces of transition together, that dysphoria developed into, multiple things that I didn't like about my body because of how I identify and my gender assigned at birth. So there were some things I had control over, some things I didn't, and sort of, I guess, how to work through that, and recognize it for what it is. I want to talk to you about the differences between social and physical dysphoria by giving you some of my own examples, even the really dumb stuff that when you say it back, you're just like, really? But it happens, like really dumb stuff, so tune in for that one. And also how the nature of it changes. This is a big one. So going on hormones, I thought, naively perhaps, that my dysphoria would be alleviated, and a lot of it was from the dysphoria that I was feeling pre-hormones. However, it has shifted and changed in terms of how it presents itself in my life now. And I think that's really important to talk about. There are some things out there on that, but I don't think it's talked about enough. So I'll give you my experience on how it was before and then how it's shifted. And then maybe some examples of how to cope. I think there's a fair bit out there about how to sort of alleviate your dysphoria, but I'll try and give you some of my examples as well along the way. If there's anything there that you want to hear about in particular, feel free to let me know, and I will try and sort of focus on that in one of these videos. Just beware that a lot of this is going to be my own experience. If I do talk about someone else's experience, they will be referenced, and their links will be in the description box, because that's only fair if I'm going to include somebody else's views. Just remember that the most important thing that we can do, whether you are a trans person, whether you are an ally, or you just want to get a little bit more information about it, is support one another. Let's stop crapping on each other and just support. Alright, that's it from me. A little bit of an introduction to the next couple of videos that I want to make. I will go back to that relationship PTSD video that I talked about. That will hopefully be up in the next couple of weeks. Alright, thanks if you made it to the end. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time. Okay, bye. Yay, we're done.